Hey there, everybody, and welcome back to the Plant Path. And in this episode, I'm going to do something new. I had a little bit of inspiration, and I wanted to try doing a new series here on some of my favorite books. I get questions all the time in terms of what my favorite books are for clinical herbalism or herb-drug interactions or alchemy or medical astrology, and everybody wants to know what I'm reading. So while we do have a really in-depth post on our website on building your herbal library, we'll put a link for that in the description below. I'd like to start spotlighting some of my personal favorite books, share just a little bit about them, why I like them, some of my favorite aspects of them. And so for this first one here, I want to start off with Medical Astrology, a guide to planetary pathology by my teacher in medical astrology, Judith Hill. When I first got this book, up until then, I had read maybe 2 or 3 books about medical astrology that I think were written a little bit more in, I think they were written more in the 70s. This was a little bit more recent, written by Judith. But one of the things that kind of bugged me about those other books is that all of a sudden the book, about halfway through, would stop being about medical astrology, and all of a sudden it would be talking about, crystals and chakras and energy healing and Reiki, and that's all fine and good, but that's not medical astrology. And so when I got my hands on this, it just really struck me how direct and to the point this book was. I also really appreciate the way that, this is really Judith's kind of foundational book on medical astrology. So if you're just getting started and just are like, what is this? What do I need to know? What are the basics? What's the foundation of it? I think this is one of the best places to start. One of the things that I appreciate about how Judith lays this book out is that she lays out some of the most important key points that you need to consider when you're doing health assessment based on medical astrology. So that's how it begins, the 9 key points of health assessment. From there, she really just builds on the foundation. So we're going through the 12 signs and the parts of the body that they correlate to. I appreciate, Judith really is a scholar when it comes to this kind of stuff. She has studied the old Renaissance astrologers from, William Lilly and Culpeper and the herbal astrologers and people that were using this from a long time ago, and has compiled a lot of their data into her works. But one of the things that really struck me about the way Judith talks about the 12 signs is how, we tend to hear, Aries rules the head and Taurus the throat, and it splits in Gemini, and you've got your lungs and your arms and your hands, and then you get down the Cancer and the stomach and the breast, and just down through the body. One of the things that really struck me, where I was like, whoa, this lady is something else, is the way Judith talks about the sign polarities generating organ systems. And I'm actually I'm going to be doing a separate discussion on this topic because I think it's really important. I think it's really interesting because you can't really look at signs in isolation. And so, for example, Judith talks about how there's these axes. Basically, in a way, it's like there's 6 fundamental qualities that exist in opposition to one another. So you have say, for example, the Taurus Scorpio. Taurus is the throat, the ears, the lower jaw, the throat, the neck, this whole region here. Scorpio is the pelvic region, essentially, the colon, the bladder, the reproductive system. And there's certain ways that you can see these polarities working. With Taurus, the throat is where you swallow food. Scorpio is the end of the tube with the colon. This connection also was very interestingly exemplified during puberty, when the voice tends to change, and at the same time the reproductive system matures. So that axis is becoming triggered during that time. So I found her section on the signs is very, very interesting, because it doesn't see them in isolation, it sees them in connection and relationship to one another. And if there's one thing about astrology, is that it's about seeing patterns and connections and relationships. Then she goes through to describe the planetary qualities. And I like that these are organized by chapter, and again, relationships. So she talks about the sun as, the battery and your life force, and then the moon as being the distributor of that life force. She talks about the nature of metabolism and planets being connected. So like Sun, Mars, and Saturn, those all work together to generate metabolism, right? How hot you burn or how cold you burn, depending on where you're at. She lumps Saturn and Mars together as the malefics and talks about them, as well as Venus and Jupiter as the benefics. So again, the way that she draws correlations and connections between things, I just love that kind of stuff. That's how I learn. These chapters on the planets are really, really great. She gets into, each planet as it goes through the 12 signs, and predominantly some of the possible ways that planet in that sign could manifest in health problems. Now, what I like about that, so the way everybody, and it's like, a lot of people think of this as like, oh, cookbook astrology. I don't think it's good to think of it that way. Because the way a lot of people tend to use a book like that is they look at their chart, right? And they say, oh, I've got Saturn in Sagittarius. And so they go and they look up Saturn in Sagittarius and read that, but they don't read Saturn in Aries, Saturn in Taurus, Saturn in Gemini, all the way around. That's a mistake. So the important thing is that you read each planet in each sign, and what it does is it helps you to understand how that planet influences that sign. And the way Judith describes it is the planet is the energetic quality, it's the quality. And I tend to think of it in terms of energetics. Each planet has a certain quality and characteristic to it that is present within a particular area of the body as represented by the sign. So as you read through those, you're really seeing like, oh, this quality of Saturn in Aries manifests very different than it does in Taurus and Gemini, but you can still see that golden thread of influence of Saturn through the different parts of the body. So it's really, really useful tool. I like that. She goes into Mercury and Uranus, clumped together as nervous planets, Neptune and Pluto. Of course, there's not much to say about Pluto because we don't always, fully know. Now, the other piece that was a big takeaway for me about this book was her emphasis on the lunar nodes as important medical signatures in the chart, because they represent one of the fundamental patterns that's talked about in like every tradition of herbal medicine, which would be patterns of excess and deficiency. We look at, say, traditional Chinese medicine, it's like everything has this dynamic of excess or deficiency. Is it yin deficiency? Is it excess of yang? Is it excess of fire? Is it excess deficiency is a really important polarity in herbal traditions. That's for example, one of the main ways we would differentiate something like a headache is that you want to really differentiate, is this an excess type headache or a deficiency type headache, because you're going to treat it very differently. That pattern is reflected in the lunar nodes. She calls entry and exit doors. And this is a really useful area to assess specific preconditions in the body for weaknesses and strengths, excesses, and deficiencies. So very, very helpful. Then she proceeds to go through important areas of the chart based on houses, the houses of health, where she really details the first, the sixth, the eighth, and the 12th houses as being primary areas in the chart to look at. She talks about the 4 elements and the 3 modes. Now, I always thought that was a little bit of an interesting ordering of things. I suppose I tend to think of 4 elements and 3 modes as really foundational. So when I tend to teach this stuff, I tend to teach that at the beginning prior to talking about signs, because from my perspective, signs and modes are elements and modes are the building blocks for the signs. And so if we really understand the elements in depth and the modes in depth and the planets in depth, those all come together in the signs. If you understand those building blocks, signs are much, I would say, more readily understandable because you know their constituent elements. Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying anything that I'm sharing with you here in this post, then I want to make sure to tell you about what's happening on March 18th, 2025. We are going to be releasing our astro-herbalism mini course, a 100% free 3-part in-depth workshop series that goes into significant more detail on the unique synergies and potencies of medical astrology and clinical herbal medicine. So be sure to mark the calendar. Be sure to head on over to our website at evolutionaryherbalism.com. Sign up for our newsletter list so you'll get the announcement for when we are opening up this series. We also will be gathering a waiting list so you can be the first in line to join us in the astro-herbalism mini course. Mark the calendar, March 18th, 2025, and I look forward to seeing you there. She has a section on transits and progressions, which is very important. And then some really interesting examples, for example, how to find a safe surgery date. She talks about antidotes and treatments by planet type, diagnostics. All in all, a really, really great book. I love this book. As you can see, it's thoroughly dog-eared. There's a couple mistakes in there. I remember being in class with her. Yeah, see, mine's all marked up. I remember being in class with her and she was saying, oh, you know, there's like slight little mistake. Every book's got its mistakes. I don't think there's any that are too, terrible there. Just some minor ones here and there, but my book has some mistakes in it too. So it happens. Writing a book is complicated and a lot of work, and it's easy to overlook things like that. So this is my review of medical astrology. Who's this book for? I think this book is for really anyone interested in medical astrology. Whether you are, if you're just getting going, I think this is essential. I think this should be your foundational study book, really. I think this is a good reference book. This is, I think, one of the most important medical astrology books in terms of modern text on the topic. I think Judith is one of the best on the subject that's really outspoken about and teaching and sharing this knowledge and information at a scholarly level. Like, she's scholarly with this stuff as well as practical, has used it in her own practice for a very long time. So I think that's a really important consideration in regards to who and where the information is coming from. I've known Judith for a really long time. She's fantastic and just a really lovely woman and person, and very knowledgeable and humble with that knowledge, which I truly appreciate. But even if you're advanced, like if you've been doing medical astrology for a long time, I think Judith has a way of explaining things in a way that is just unique. Like the whole thing with sign polarity, I'd never heard anyone talk about that before, and it clicked a lot of things into place. Now, perhaps maybe that was because at the time of my reading it, I hadn't been doing medical astrology for that long. I was still just getting going, kind of like back in my early 20s. But still, nonetheless, the more I've returned to this book and read it, I always pick up on a few more things. And there's a lot of accuracy. Like one thing, for example, I recently had a client who was quite sick with a degenerative neurological disease. Multiple sclerosis was the official diagnosis from the doctors. And I was observing his chart and I was like, looking around and kind of trying to see what some of the contributing factors would be. And this was the first time I'd worked with multiple sclerosis. Of course, we're talking about the brain. Of course, we're talking about the nervous system. And for me, there's some kind of like main areas that I tend to go to when I'm thinking about a chart. When I'm thinking about a certain organ system affliction, okay, there's autoimmunity here, likely there's inflammation, it's a nerve. So I'm like going to the places where I think, and I was like, nothing's really going on here. What's happening? And I was like, I'm just gonna go look, see what Judith says. So I was, reading around Judith's book, and lo and behold, there I was at this one area, and I can't remember it off the top of my head, of the descriptions. I was like, there it was, multiple sclerosis, degenerative neurological stuff. And it was right there in the chart. And it wasn't, at the time, for me, the most obvious thing to check. But when I had come back and re-referenced this book, it was spot on, right? It was like, oh yeah, there it is. So it was very, very clear. So my point being, and I've been doing the medical astrology thing for some time now, and I certainly don't claim to know it all, but this is a book that I'm constantly returning to and referencing, and I find it to be very, very useful. Hopefully you do too. This book is readily available on Amazon. It is not an expensive book to acquire. Judith does self-publish her book, so you might consider, it's Stellium Press. I believe you could just search Judith Hill Medical Astrologer and her website comes up. I believe she has her own website, which might be Judith Hill Astrologer or something. We'll put the links in the description below. I'm not sure if there is a way to purchase her book directly on her site, but if you could purchase it directly on her site, I'm sure that would support her more directly and more readily than buying it on Amazon. But of course it is on Amazon because Amazon is just far too convenient for most of us. But if you can try to see if you can get it directly from her, that's great too, to support Judith. So, that's our first book review here. I'm planning on doing these every so often. Certainly not going to be like a weekly book review. But let me know in the comments what you think. If a book review process is useful to you or interesting to you. I'm planning on having some diversity in terms of the books. We'll do here, obviously, a medical astrology one. I'll do some of my favorite herbal ones. We'll talk alchemy books, and hopefully over the years, we'll have a really nice collection or playlist of book reviews here on the channel for you. So let me know what you think in the comments. I'm super curious to hear your feedback. And once again, just want to say thank you to you for joining me here on the Plant Path. Hopefully you learned something good. If you have not already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, share it with someone that might be interested. It really does help support the channel. I know some of you watch or listen, but don't subscribe. So what are you waiting for? Subscribe to the channel. It really does help us out a lot. And of course, if you want to learn more, head on over to evolutionaryherbalism.com, where we got all of our free content over there and more in-depth free content that's only available there. And you can always get updates by subscribing to our email list over there for all of our free workshop series that we offer, as well as any times that we are opening up enrollment for our courses. So thanks so much for joining me here and making it to the end. I do appreciate it. Blessings to you on your plant path. And until the next time, take care and be well.